Endured a brutal road trip with my girlfriend's family to a chaotic wedding, only to be wrongly blamed and vilified by them. Ages ago, I was dating a woman with a large, mysterious family that she generally kept far away from me. I never really knew what they were like until the weekend we all traveled from the Northeast to Virginia for one of her cousin's weddings. The plan seemed simple enough: drive down to Virginia on Friday morning and back Sunday night. Originally, I was supposed to drive the two of us, but her father insisted that we ride with him after all. He had a spacious SUV, and we could supposedly relax in the back seat. Against my better judgment, I agreed. Months before, I made absolutely clear that I needed to be back by 9 am on Monday, because of work commitments that I simply couldn't hand off to anyone else. I confirmed over and over, at least twice a week for 2 months, that she'd told her father and that he was on board with leaving Sunday night. I always received reassurances. The morning of the trip, I drove us over to her father's house. But instead of the promised big SUV waiting in the driveway, his hatchback commuter car sat idling in the street. I watched, somewhat in disbelief, as he and his son-in-law loaded everything into the cramped little car, then motioned for us to climb into the back. My feet were on top of bags, knees crammed up to my chest, but I kept my mouth shut, exchanged exasperated glances with my girlfriend, and accepted our fate. Barely 10 miles into the trip on a major highway near Nick, her father started chatting about our planned return on Monday night. I shot a look at my girlfriend, who suddenly found the window very interesting, then spoke up. I had to be back for 9 on Monday, and I'd checked with her countless times to make sure that it had been communicated. Her father was totally surprised. He knew nothing about it. It turned out she had been lying about telling him. Right then, as we rolled down the highway, I considered my options should I ask to be let out at the next gas station, find a cab, and call it quits. When I asked to be dropped off, her father reluctantly agreed to return Sunday night instead of Monday. The drive was a literal marathon from hell. Her father and his son-in-law swapped driving duties, sticking religiously to 45 mph in the fast lane. We managed to get lost multiple times, making pit stops in Philadelphia, D.C., even somehow veering into West Virginia, before finally landing in our destination town in eastern Virginia. We arrived at 7 am and of course, the plan was to head straight to Waffle Hut, a place I'd heard of but never visited. Let me tell you, 21 hours folded into the back seat of a tiny 2-door hatchback, knees up to my chest, is no small test of endurance. We'd stopped only twice for gas, and outside of those brief chances to stretch, I was essentially compacted into origami. When we finally tumbled out of the car, I was met with a crowd of her family so large it took up the entire Waffle House. My girlfriend and I found a small table with one of her cousins and her boyfriend, Dave. He looked like he'd seen war. I learned he'd left Thursday morning and had been dragged through Connecticut, Pennsylvania, and Ohio en route to Virginia, even spending Thursday night in a Pittsburgh motel. The Waffle House was running on a skeleton crew, just a waitress and her daughter on the grill. The waitress worked her way through the mob, our table dead last. We'd walked in at 7 am, and it was nearly an hour before Dave and I even got to order. We both requested exit over easy, toast, coffee, hold the grates. When our food finally arrived, the griddle cook decided to make up for holding the grates by piling on a dozen extra eggs between us. Dave and I barely blinked as a mountain of eggs was set before us. After 21 hours on a granola bar, I was ravenous. But as I looked up, I saw the entire family watching, some stretching, some already making their way out, all clearly expecting Dave and me to get up and leave, even though we'd just been served. I didn't care. I dug into my breakfast. So did Dave. We took our time, sipping coffee, chatting idly about TV shows, and polishing off every bite, even the hash browns I'd normally avoid. 8 eggs later, I felt a strange sense of victory. By the time we finally stood, the room had mostly cleared, leaving only a handful of cars worth of people to leave alongside us. That weekend only got weirder. Everyone was squeezed into an aunt's house, and some had to pitch tents in the yard. I'd been under the impression we were staying at a hotel. Oh, how wrong I was. Dave and I were mostly shunned by the family, outside of my girlfriend, her aunt the house's owner, and the occasional word from others. Our lodging? A pile of throw pillows and old blankets for the slate floor by the door, because apparently, there was nowhere else. We managed a few hours sleep, only for the house to wake up for the wedding reception. Dressed in suits, with our girlfriends in dresses, we called for a cab when the cars became an issue. The wedding itself was just 10 minutes, right before the reception, all held at the same hall. Half the guests looked like they were headed to the mall. Within 30 minutes, chaos ensued, aunts so drunk they were wailing on balconies, uncles and cousins stripping down to undershirts or less on the dance floor, and madness all around. The father of the woman I was dating, I found myself at this wedding reception, which rapidly devolved into sheer chaos as the night went on. The guy I was dating was prancing around the dance floor, shirt waving over his head, his pants sagging well beneath his ass. It was like the collective decorum had abandoned the building. At one point, I watched as someone leaned too far back in a chair, toppled over, and crashed into a massive mirror mounted to the wall, cracking it. No one batted an eye. I couldn't help but keep glancing over at the bride, who sat at the head table beside her new husband. Both of them looked completely sober, faces frozen in bewilderment as their own reception unraveled into this fever dream party. The energy in that room was a mix of wild and apathetic. I sat with my friends, just observing the slow-motion train wreck, and couldn't help noticing that no one approached the newlyweds for hours. Eventually, it all became too much for us. Around 7 p.m., with the reception supposed to last until 10, my small group and I decided to get out while we still could. We escaped to a nearby hotel, leaving behind the ever-escalating circus. But I couldn't shake the worry for the bride and groom if what I'd already seen was only the beginning. How much worse could it get after we left? Sure enough, around 11:30 a.m. that night, the phone call started. The bride was frantically reaching out to my girlfriend and her friends, looking for help. We had to go back. When we returned to the venue, the scene was post-apocalyptic, trashed rooms, pass-out guests everywhere, and barely anyone in any shape to drive. The bride begged us to help shuttle her family members to her aunt's house. Honestly, my first thought was to leave them where they'd fallen, but of course, we helped, shepherding people out and ferrying them home. Some guests who could barely stand insisted on driving themselves. I actually saw staff at the venue calling in reports as they watched these inebriated guests get behind the wheel. By the time we finally delivered the last of them, I was beyond exhausted. I slipped back to my hotel room alone and passed out. Next morning, I ran into Dave, who was lamenting his own predicament. He was supposed to work the next day and wasn't sure how he'd even get home, since the person he'd come with had spent 20 minutes vomiting all over his own car the night before. Around noon, my girlfriend called. Apparently everyone at the aunt's house was already drinking again, things were spiraling out of control, and there would be no heading home that night. That clinched it. Dave and I went out, rented a car, and headed home ourselves. The drive was long, but uneventful. No way was I getting lost in D.C., Philly, Ohio, or West Virginia after all that. When my girlfriend finally got back, I called her. She told me that her family hated Dave and me, accusing us of being selfish for not staying, for needing to eat, for having to get back to work on Monday. Dave was even blamed for vomiting in the uncle's car even though he doesn't drink at all. To top it off, we were called rude for crashing on the slate floor for a few hours. Some even suggested we should have slept outside, but the aunt thankfully disagreed. Before I knew it, Dave and I were getting blamed for the damage at the venue, the broken mirror, and even something that happened to the wedding cake after we left. I never saw that girlfriend again. That whole experience was so humiliating and absurd. We agreed during that last phone call that it was over. She kept apologizing for everything, and honestly, I couldn't blame her for wanting a clean break. Dave and I stayed in touch for a while. He ended up breaking it off with his girlfriend too after that weekend. But good things came out of it for him. He met someone wonderful the next year and got married. There's a lot more insane stuff that happened with that family after these events, but this part of the story has already gone on for too long. Another time, maybe. Some context is probably important. The woman I was dating, Sarah, had divorced parents, and her father had remarried. Sarah lived with her mother, Lynn, a corporate lawyer, because thanks to the insane housing market so many people here end up living with their parents well into adulthood. Sarah and I actually met through Tiger Woods. No, not the golfer, but the county's best golfer, and he and I became good friends. After we first met on the course while I was nursing a bad back injury. To this day, we still hit the links together regularly, almost 20 years later. Lynn, Sarah's mom, often warned me about the family. She gave me all kinds of advice: how they ticked, what to watch out for. When she and Sarah's father divorced, the family literally threw a party and declared Lynn dead. That might sound like an exaggeration, but I was there, I heard it all. Sometime after the breakup, I changed jobs and discovered Lynn also worked there, though in a different group. We'd always gotten along, so it became a routine to have lunch together with a couple mutual friends from the company. A few months down the line, Lynn announced she was engaged. We had a little celebration for her. She'd been with the same man for a while, and they finally decided to tie the knot. Wedding planning seemed to go smoothly from the outside. Sarah's father, whom I'll call King Khan because he really believed himself some kind of royalty and his family worshipped him accordingly, lived about half an hour away from Lynn, far enough that their paths never crossed. Given that, and the fact the family insisted on treating Lynn like she was dead, there should have been no reason for King Khan to have anything to do with her. but cemeteries and dead ex-wives tend to get noticed, I suppose. When Kane Khan learned of Lynn's engagement, I thought it was odd that a letter from him arrived just 3 or 4 days after she'd hosted a gathering at her home. There were balloons on the mailbox. I figured it must have been a gathering for bridesmaids and close family. The timing made me wonder if Kane Khan had actually been parked in his car, binoculars pointed at Lynn's house, spying while the party happened. His letter, a red envelope, of course arrived not long thereafter. With no return address, our red envelope arrived well, not exactly a red envelope, but just an ordinary white one that someone had taken the time to completely color in with a red marker or highlighter. I slid my finger under the flap and pulled out a single sheet of printer paper, its surface deeply ridged from the force of the black inked words scrolled across it. There was no signature, but it didn't need one. Every inch was packed with venom, a tirade attacking Lynn, calling her every awful name imaginable, accusing her of being a terrible wife and an even worse mother. The writer demanded to know how she could even think about marriage, when she'd already made her sacred vow. The letter ended with an icy threat: "You'll get what's coming to you." The letter set off a fury of speculation between all of us who knew about it. Of course, Kane Khan immediately sprang to mind, but honestly, it could have been anyone in that family. I'd seen enough of them to recognize their legendary boundary issues and emotional development stuck somewhere near elementary school. The entire family was one giant dysfunctional blob, codependent to the core. The letter weighed hardest on Tiger Woods, though. He quit golfing and stopped going out on weekends, unless he absolutely had to, just staying home, wary, tense, expecting at any moment for Lynn's ex's unhinged family to do something worse. And the first real blow for the L soon after, Sarah, Lynn's daughter, broke her silence. I hadn't spoken to her or seen her since the Virginia wedding. She told her mother she wouldn't be coming to the wedding, citing the chaos brewing with her father and his side of the family. Things had deteriorated so badly that Sarah's stepmother and father were actually trying to have Sarah declared incompetent just so they could control her, lock her away tighter. It broke Lynn in a way I hadn't seen before. She just stopped talking about her own wedding at work, as if naming the pain would make it more real. Weeks slipped by in silence, and then suddenly, the wedding date circled around. I was dating a woman, a chef who owned a popular events venue. She offered to come along as my date when I told her this was the big day Lynn was getting married. Lynn and Tiger Woods planned a quick, simple ceremony right at the reception venue, with everything to follow right there. We arrived on time, but somehow managed to miss the whole cluster of chaos. But the stories poured in. First, Kane Khan, the infamous ex, showed up nearly 2 hours before Lynn. She hadn't even arrived yet. She was still back with her bridal party, fussing in the bridal suite. Kane Khan turned up already drunk, the same old hatchback from Virginia idling in the parking lot, door open. The valet hadn't even started his shift yet. Kane Khan made a spectacle, staggering up the hall steps, yelling for Lynn louder and louder as he spotted wedding guests and recognized a few faces. When he started waving his arms and getting physical, the staff along with a particularly brave groomsman had to grapple with him just to keep things from turning uglier. He was small but wiry, and for a moment, it looked like he'd wriggle out of their grip, but they managed to shoo him outside, where police soon arrived and arrested him on the spot. Turns out, Kane Khan had written that red envelope letter all along. He confessed to the police later that he'd been parking just down the block, watching Lynn's house to protect my daughter, he said, even though Sarah hadn't lived there for years, or anywhere nearby. I can't help but picture Kane Khan's new wife, fuming, marching herself to the station to bail him out, all because he got drunk, violent, and crashed the wedding of his ex-wife, a woman he'd basically been stalking. And in case you're wondering about that damn hatchback, Kane Khan really did leave it running the whole time, door wide open. When the police hauled him away, a kindly officer did him the favor of locking the doors and shutting them, just to keep wandering hands away. Never did hear if anyone bothered to turn it off. There's another story about this family, a case of mistaken identity at another wedding a year or so later, though that one came to me secondhand. Maybe I'll tell that to one someday if you're interested. Sometimes I wonder if these stories are really wedding stories at all, or just wild tales about dangerously unhinged people with weddings swirling around them in the background. About a year after Lynn's wedding, the humidity settled in like a wet towel and everyone I knew seemed to be getting married again. My girlfriend at the time, the chef with the event space, had a triple header Saturday, and I swung by late afternoon to drop off a charger she'd forgotten. Tiger texted me to come meet him across the street at the country club. He was early for an evening reception we'd both been invited to, and he wanted to hit a bucket of balls before he got trapped in small talk and chafing shoes. I parked by the row of spruces that lined the club's fence and cut across the lot, and that's when I saw it, the same dented hatchback, driver's door open, idling, the radio hissing static. For a half second I convinced myself it had to be a twin. Then the party bus turned in behind it and I didn't have to convince myself of anything. They spilled out like a paint can tipped on a sidewalk. Uncles already glassy-eyed before dinner, the aunts dressed in sparkly knit tops meant for casinos, cousins smoking on the curb. I started to pivot back to my car when Tiger's cart rolled around the bend, his driver bristling out of the bag like a spear. He waved me over. "We'll just hit a quick bucket," he said, reading my face. "We'll be behind the nets. We'll be invisible." I didn't believe it, but we went anyway. They had 2 weddings running at once, an outdoor ceremony for a couple from Minnesota on a lawn by the 10th wth, and our reception slated inside the ballroom overlooking the 18th green. Music from a string quartet play, and to the clack of range balls. The sun was low and everything looked harmless from a distance. I was 5 swings in, beginning to unclench my shoulders, when yelling rolled up from the valet circle like a siren winding up. A voice I recognized without wanting to, the raw, nasal throw of someone who believes volume is a credential cut through everything. "She's here." I watched one of the ants' hair teased into a storm cloud, purse clenched like a weapon, beeline toward a woman in a cream pantsuit standing near the doors. From behind, with a pearl choker and the neat bobbed hair, she could have been Lynn's double from 40 yards. The ant closed the distance and, without a breath, went right into the greatest hits: liar, homewrecker, dead woman walking. She threw her drink. The poor woman froze, then turned, and I watched her face cycle through the stages of bewilderment, stranger anger, then bafflement, then a dawning horror that this wasn't mistaken recognition, it was a full-on fantasy. By the time I could get down the little slope from the range to the walkway, 2 more cousins had joined the chorus and were herding the woman whose name turned out to be Linda, mother of the Minnesota bride, toward the steps. Tiger got there the same moment I did, wedged himself between Linda and the ant, palms up, trying to start the kind of rational sentence that dies immediately in the wind of crazy. "She's not who you think she is," I said. "She's not Lynn." I hadn't heard Lynn's name said out loud around them since the night of the arrest, and saying it felt like stepping into a minefield. The ant recoiled, recalibrated, and then went for guilt instead of volume. "We know what you people do. You sneak in. You ruin families. You don't get to take her again. Security doesn't move fast when everyone looks like they're dressed for a photo." By the time the coordinator hustled over with her earpiece and her little clipboard, one of the uncles, the same son-in-law who'd taken turns holding the hatchback at 45 mph down the interstate, had decided to defend his flock's honor by squaring up with the club pro who had dared to ask them not to smoke under the portico. It escalated with a beautiful inevitability: a finger jabbed into a chest, a shoulder bump, a slap at a pack of cigarettes, and then the universal Jim Move shirt yanked halfway over the head to show someone meant business. The pro, a lean guy in knit shoes and a visor, kept his hands down. One of the groomsmen from the Minnesota set, who turned out to be an off-duty cop, didn't. He had the uncle face down on the carpet in a heartbeat, the aunt shrieking that Linda had attacked first, the whole story rewriting in real time. If it had just been that, maybe it could have settled into paperwork and mortification. But when the aunt saw me standing next to Tiger and recognized me, a new battery in the rage toy clicked in. She pointed like I was a bingo number finally called. "There he is," she said, and a head swiveled the way pigeons do all at once. "The driver," someone hissed. In their mythology, apparently, I'd mutated into the villain of 3 different stories at once: the man who forced them to drive through Pennsylvania at a crawl, the man who made Dave puke in a car he'd never sat in, the man who held Lynn's hand down the aisle. It didn't have to make sense, it only had to feel good. I let the staff herd us inside to wait out the storm that rolled in with. The country club had one of those lounges that exist specifically for nights like that, overstuffed chairs and a fireplace they keep lit in July. From the window, I could see the hatchback still idling, door open, a ribbon of exhaust shakily marking its place like a tail. And then, blessedly, I saw something else: Sarah, alone on the edge of the pudding green, dress fluttering at her knees, looking like the only sane person at a bus stop after the last bus left. I don't know what I expected her voice to sound like after a year of silence. It was tired and younger than I wanted it to be. She said hello and her eyes filled, and she didn't apologize so much as give up the shape of the lie she'd been caught in. Her stepmother had been telling everyone Lynn planned to crash and kidnap her. "Lock me up, teach me a lesson," she said, trying to laugh and not making it. She hadn't believed it all the way, she said, but she'd believed it enough not to come to her own mother's wedding, and that was enough to poison any well. She'd come to this one because it was safe around family branch, outside, cameras everywhere. Safe, until someone who looked like her mother walked by and they all saw a ghost. We walked her to the valet together, Tiger flanking, me spotting 4 incoming ants, and slid her into his car with a blanket still in the back from last winter. He told her he'd take her to our chef friend's place across the street, and we'd figure it out from there. When he pulled away, the aunt tried to film the plate with her phone. I stepped in front of her camera without speaking and got the full video. Nasty treatment, spit flying, pearls wobbling, the names diminishing into the juvenile for lack of vocabulary. Security finally cinched them back to their ballroom with a firm hand and the promise of consequences, a word that seemed to stump them like a logic problem. The police arrived in time to disperse the orbit left over from that flare-up, clipboards out, taking statements. A member of the Minnesota bridal party, Linda's son, was surprisingly calm about it, in that flat Midwestern way that reads as saintly patience until it doesn't. He kept repeating that no one was pressing charges if they just left his mother alone. "We don't want to wreck your wedding," I heard myself saying, and only after the words left it, and I realized how absurd they were under chandeliers and champagne with a string quartet still gamely playing inside. The coordinator whispered an apology to Linda and handed her a towel for her shoulders, dabbing at Cabernet she hadn't ordered. If there's a law of their universe, it's this: when the store closes on one drama, they find an after-hours entrance to the next. By the time I made it across the street to the event space, King Khan had joined the party in the only way that made sense for him, hovering in the periphery. He hadn't crossed onto club property, I'll give him that, but he was parked 2 driveways down, engine chugging, watching. The protection order from the last time spelled out distances in feet, not driveways. Our chef friend had tucked Sarah in the office with a plate of roast chicken and a glass of water, and I stood on the loading dock watching the windshield blink with the reflection of the streetlight and a phone screen. My phone pinged. Red envelope. Not an envelope this time, but a photo, a picture of me from the lounge window, blurred through glass, attached to a number I didn't recognize, with a caption that said simply, "We see you." The club's head of security ambled over with the ease of a man who's dealt with 3 divorces and a Quincy era on the same night. He looked down the street, squinted, and made a call that lasted 12 seconds. A cruiser rolled up behind the hatchback like it had been waiting around the corner for this exact play. King Khan didn't get cuffed this time. He got cited, warned, documented down to his shoelaces. He waited for them to finish and then did the most on-brand thing imaginable. He asked if anyone had jumper cables, because the hatchback had finally coughed itself to death. It should have ended there. It didn't. The photos from Minnesota's wedding went up online 2 days later. In one of them, crooked, probably grabbed in the swirl of that first confrontation, you could clearly see Linda's cream suit and the aunt's hand angling a glass. In the reflection of the lobby door behind them, a thin man in a windbreaker and a bad posture stood perched by a column, turned just enough to be identifiable to anyone who'd ever been trapped in a car with him for 21 hours. The club sent that photo to the prosecutor's office as an addendum. It wasn't a slam dunk violation, the detective said, but it helped paint the picture. I forwarded it to no one. I closed my phone and went outside and put balls into the evening for an hour without saying anything. Sarah called Lynn the next day from a borrowed phone. I didn't hear what they said. Tiger wouldn't tell me, even if I'd asked. Later that week, I passed a mailbox on my way into our office with a smear of red around the flag, and I had the stupid impulse you have when you lie awake at 2 in the morning and picture all the worst versions of people. Prank, mark, omen. Was just paint. It flaked under my thumb. A month later, a plain white envelope with the judge's seal on it landed on King Khan's step, courtesy of a courier who made sure a camera saw where he left it. The order was longer this time, clearer, drawn in thicker lines. I didn't celebrate. I didn't trade stories. I went to Waffle House by myself at 10 o'clock at night and ordered eggs over easy and coffee hold the grits and watched the cook crack shells, one after another, like none of it meant anything to the eggs. I ate until I felt that same small victory turn over in me, the one I'd felt years earlier when the room had expected me to leave my plate and I hadn't. I paid, tipped too much, and sat in the parking lot listening to the night insects buzz, and for the first time in a long while, the engine sounds on the road all blended into one, none of them the loose rattling cough of a hatchback holding more ghosts than gas. 2 months after the longer order landed on King Khan's stoop, the air went brittle and cold in that way that makes every metal door sound like a cymbal. My chef girlfriend texted me a photo of a contract on her office desk, Sunday engagement brunch, Hayden Cash, fake sounding company name that could have been a youth group or a tax shelter, phone number with no voicemail. She'd flagged it as a lightweight rental, no bar, no dance floor, just coffee, waffles, a short toast, and only bothered me because of the rider stapled to the back, no eggs. It was underlined 3 times. Who hates eggs at a brunch? She asked. I said the kind of people who bring coolers to weddings and leave cars running, and she told me to stop hexing her day and to swing by early with the flowers she'd left at home. I walked in the service door to the low hum of a prep kitchen, finding its rhythm: sheet pans in the oven, the slap of knives on boards, the one dishwasher who sings areas under his breath before noon. The manager with the earpiece met me halfway with a face you save for a grease fire. "You need to see the lobby," she said. They came. Decorated. They had Someone had ringed the welcome table in votive candles that were not on the approved list and topped the pen jar with a red silk sleeve. The guest book had been Frankensteined out of a 3-ring binder, and every page edge was colored in highlighter pink like a bruise trying to pass for a blush. The centerpiece on the escort car display was a spray-painted mailbox with a flag up, the paint still a little sticky. My girlfriend gave me a look over a stack of plates that meant your omen is tackier than you thought. They weren't all there yet, just the advanced team of Aunt Energy, 2 cousins in boots too tall for their balance, and a woman I recognized as the stepmother in a cardigan with a sequin cross so big it did most of the talking. She clocked me in the doorway, recalibrated through 4 expressions, and landed on an icy smile. "We can smell sabotage," she said, as if it were a thing any decent venue pumped through the vents. "Congratulations," I said, nodding to the banner that read he'd put a ring on it in a font aggressive enough to be a threat. I didn't ask who it was for because I didn't need to. The names on the placards were just last initials, and the word family was lettered at the top of the seating chart 3 times like an invocation. They started like a church supper gone sideways. Someone set a Bluetooth speaker on the welcome table and let it chew through ballads at an unsafe volume. They unbundled waffle irons from grocery bags and began looking for outlets like raccoons. The event manager stopped it with a gentle, firm hand. The venue would provide the waffles, that was in the contract, and the ant nearest the extinguisher hissed like a cat. "We have our own recipe," she said, waving off safety like a rumor. Then the hatchback pulled in. I didn't even need to see the front. The way it nested half over the line, door swinging like a lazy metronome, below, asthmatic cough of a car that's lived 12 more years than it was promised, my stomach knew before my eyes did. He didn't get out. He sat there and idled, phone lid in the well of the wheel, one hand on the shifter like it was a talisman. A delivery van had to shimmy around him to unload, and he raised his palm in a floating half apology that never made contact with any remorse. Security had the distance measured now. The restraining order turned sidewalks into math. He was legally a driveway and a half out of bounds. He'd learned the perimeter the way a dog learns the invisible fence, by yelping until the boundary imprinted. The head of security nodded to me without changing his face and took his position by the door with the same posture he used when the mariachi band arrived 2 hours early for a bar mitzvah and played for no one. The guests arrived in clots. Engaged cousins I'd never met, a parade of sparkly nets and suit jackets from the sectionals at Best Isle, a toddler in a clip-on bow tie allergic to the concept of a nap. And then Sarah, pressed into a cream sweater that wasn't new, hair down, head up. We met eyes like the last time we'd left them on a shelf and forgotten them there. She was by herself. That felt like a miracle and an omen. "I shouldn't have come," she said as soon as she reached me. "I wanted to see if they were real." The stepmother's cross glittered behind her like a license to house 4 bad choices. My girlfriend started the brunch with the softest script, "Good morning. The buffet would open in 5, coffee was in urns by the window, please let staff pour the syrup," because they didn't need brown lacquer footprints across the ballroom carpet. 10 minutes in, the inevitable found its cue. One of the cousins went for a cigarette under a no smoking sign the size of a pizza box, and when a server gently pointed at the sign, he clapped his hands once like a coach breaking a huddle and said in a voice you know is quoted in police reports, "We'll smoke the devil out." The ant in the sequin cross raised a toast that began borderline sweet and emptied its pockets halfway through. "To the future," she said, and added, "without thieves and whores, with the public confidence of someone who believes you can libel the dead if you declare them dead loudly enough." A blueberry rolled off a plate, and left a bruise of juice underfoot. A baby cried like a battery warning. I looked at the mailbox centerpiece, and watched the drape of pink paint creep toward a place no paint should go. It went up with a wrong candle. One of the unauthorized voters found a ribbon, the ribbon found the edge of a foam runner, the runner decided it missed oxygen and wanted more. It wasn't a blaze, it was a stubborn curling that made 3 old women shriek at a pitch that changes air pressure. The manager killed it with a towel and a flex of wrist I've only seen from people who store calm in a pantry. The scent of scorched ribbon lay down over the waffles like a warning. That should have reset the room. It did the opposite. The ant who had spent a decade rerouting every consequence away from her flock found a new narrative and fastened it to a chair. We were sabotaging them. She marched up to the kitchen doors like she had jurisdiction and got as far as her own reflection in the circular porthole before security yelled her momentum with a single hand on the bar. "Ma'am," he said, "the way you say ma'am when what you mean is please don't make me write words down." She leaned left and right and tried to film the kitchen with her phone, narrating the Great Syrup Conspiracy of 2023, and clipped a waiter carrying a tray of coffee in the process. That earned her a full cup across the sequence. Coffee has no allegiance, it goes where gravity tells it. She shrieked like we baptized her wrong. Sarah took my forearm with fingers that belonged to someone older than she was. I need to go, she said. He's texting me pictures of the building. She showed me her screen. The shots were from the street, blurred, car window stuff but one, at an angle, caught my girlfriend through her office door, head down, a stack of invoices under her hands. The caption said, "Tell your boss to be careful." I walked Sarah toward the hall the long way, through the coach room, past the florist's leftover buckets, breath sinking with the hum of the ice machine. The stepmother appeared from around an angle like she'd been dropped in by a trapdoor, blocking the exit with a kind of smile that says, "I'll bake you something and make you eat it in front of me." "Where do you think you're going?" she asked, and it was somehow not a question. Sarah squeezed me once and said, "Somewhere you can't find on your map," which would have been a line if it weren't swallowed by the overhead fire alarm choosing that exact second to test its lungs. No one pulled it. A toddler found a red lever with the same instincts that make tide pools irresistible and did what toddlers do. The room disagreed with noise in 3 languages at once. The lights went white and fast, the sprinklers didn't go but could have if the alarm had a cousin in the ceiling. Somewhere between wail and instruction, the aunt and sequins decided this was a raid. "We know our rights," she yelled at 2 banquet captains and a busboy with a dishcloth over his shoulder, then tried to usher her family out the front in formation like geese in a fog. King Kong took that as a cue. Of course he did it. He surfaced from the hatchback and made for the threshold with that small man gait that reads as unstoppable until someone stops it. Security didn't manhandle him. They just stepped into the math and put him on the wrong side of the numbers. He pinged against the invisible fence and chose a tantrum. "She kidnapped my daughter," he shouted to no one who could make that true. Sarah stood 5 feet behind me, rolling a napkin into a tight rope and unwinding it back to nothing. Police get faster when the words on the call sheet match the words on last month's report. 2 officers I recognized by posture and patience walked in under the wail, took one look at my girlfriend's manager with the earpiece, and let her script the scene for their forms. One of them peeled away for a delicate talk with the stepmother about the nature of public and private spaces. The other made eye contact with King Kong and did a bored little nod that said, "We've got the dance step to now." He told him to sit on the curb. He didn't. He said no the way you say it to a child who's picking a fight with nap time. The cuffs came out not with a snap but with a life lesson sigh of Velcro. Somewhere behind us, the waffle station hissed in a way that would have been cozy in any other world. In the confusion, my girlfriend slid a to-go container into Sarah's hands like a magician swapping a coin. "Roast chicken, green beans, something starchy, that holds heat. If you go out the side, take the ramp," she said, practical even as a strobe flickered across her hair. Tiger pulled up in his car like he'd been circling 2 blocks away on instinct, heater already on, trunk empty, blanket folded and waiting as if night had packed it there on purpose. Sarah didn't cry when she got in. She pressed the food to her stomach and stared at the glove box like it was an altar. Tiger looked me in the eye and said nothing necessary. The aunt tried to film us again. She got a lot of my face and an out-of-focus badge on the side of her own sequins. "Kidnapping," she shrieked, as if saying it populated a statute on the books of whatever in her head. One of the officers said, "Flat as Midwestern snow, your party is over," and she deflated a half-inch at the word party like she'd never considered there were names for endings that weren't deaths or betrayals. The insurance adjuster came Monday in a suit that had survived 3 hurricanes and a Quincy era. He took notes about the napkins, the wax, the ribbon that didn't obey, and looked at the mailbox centerpiece like it might testify. He asked if we wanted the security footage preserved for the prosecutor and my girlfriend said yes in the same tone she orders parchment paper efficient, unsentimental. The restraining order folded another yard of tape around the perimeter when the paperwork cleared on Wednesday. The stepmother sent exactly one text after that to a number Sarah no longer had, something about heaven and hammers and the wages of chaos, and then she found out a blocked line is a brick wall in modern life. A week later, Lynn invited me for coffee at a diner that still believes in glass sugar dispensaries you can unscrew. She waited until the waitress topped off the cups and then told me, without looking up, that Sarah had met her for a walk around the reservoir. "No speeches," Lynn said. "We just saw the same water for a while." She slid across the table a scrap of paper that had nothing on it but a small doodle and egg, badly drawn, with a smiley face in the yolk. "She made that," Lynn said, and laughed exactly once in the way people do when there's no good category for the feeling. She said it was a joke I'd get. I did. It hit me in the chest with a softness I hadn't allowed for. That night, the country club range lights popped on against the early dark. I put a bucket down between the 2 center mats, the ones with the cleanest turf, and hid until my shoulders lost their argument with the day. Down the hill, the road laid out a quiet floss of headlights. Somewhere not on that road, not near any place, I needed to be the hatchback coughed for the last time by the curb of an auto yard. and a man with a clipboard worked his pen through a checkbox that read tote. I didn't need to see it. Some endings make their own sound and lay down, finally, in the tall grass where the noise can't find them. I went home, and when I made breakfast the next morning, I broke an egg into a pan, watched it bloom, and didn't rush it.